The storage unit in Bend, Oregon had been rented under the same name since 1997. Monthly payments arrived like clockwork, always cashier's checks, never late. When the renter, listed as Michael Garrett, failed to pay for the first time in February 2019, the facility manager followed standard protocol: 30 days notice, then auction of contents. I was there representing a private collector interested in vintage scientific equipment. The auction listing mentioned laboratory materials, personal effects, possible antique instruments. What we found instead would lead me down a path of documentation so carefully preserved, so meticulously organized, that it could only have been intended for eventual discovery. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I authenticate historical materials and investigate provenance of unusual artifacts. I've worked with the Smithsonian, consulted for the National Archives, and spent 2 decades learning to distinguish genuine documentation from elaborate forgeries. Nothing in that experience prepared me for what emerged from Unit 247. The first item seemed ordinary enough: file boxes labeled by year, 1997 through 2018, technical journals, medical supplies still in their original packaging. Then the auction crew opened a climate-controlled cabinet in the back, and I saw something that made me raise my bidding paddle without conscious thought. Inside, preserved in archival quality containers, 22 years of daily journals, thousands of photographs, medical documentation in handwriting I would later verify as belonging to Dr. Michael Garrett, a physician who had disappeared from public record in 1997. And beside the written materials, secured in foam-lined cases, were biological samples labeled with dates, tissue types, and notations in 2 different handwriting styles. One set of notes was clearly human, the other wasn't. The handwriting showed consistent letter formation, but the letters themselves were wrong. Not foreign language wrong, structurally impossible wrong, as if someone had learned to write by observing humans, but possessed different motor control, different spatial reasoning. I won the auction. Cost me $18,000 and raised eyebrows from the 3 other bidders who clearly wondered what I'd seen that they'd missed. I loaded everything into a rental truck personally, drove it to my secure workspace in Portland, and spent the next 72 hours reading through documentation that would fundamentally alter my understanding of what one human being could choose to sacrifice for something, someone, not human. This is the story contained in those journals. This is Michael Garrett's testimony, preserved for 22 years and released into the world only when he could no longer maintain his vigil. Some secrets aren't kept because they're dangerous. They're kept because they're sacred. The first journal entry was dated March 15, 1997, written in Michael Garrett's precise, measured handwriting. I found him in the ravine off Highway 26, approximately 15 miles east of Sandy. I'd pulled over because I saw what I thought was a car accident. Twisted metal, scorched earth, smoke still rising. What I found instead was a craft. No other word fits. Not a plane, not a helicopter. A craft that had torn through 200 feet of forest and embedded itself in the hillside. He was still inside, alive, but badly injured. And when he looked at me through the shattered viewport, I knew that calling 911 would mean his death, not from injuries, but from what would follow. So I made a choice that would define the next 2 decades of my life. I pulled him out. I brought him home. I cross-referenced the date with news reports from March 1997. There was indeed a brief mention in the Oregonian about unexplained fires near Sandy, attributed to illegal camping. No follow-up investigation, no official inquiry. The subsequent entries detailed the first desperate weeks. Michael Garrett was 43 years old in 1997, a general practice physician in Portland with a cabin outside Sandy that he used for weekend retreats. The cabin was isolated, 20 acres, nearest neighbor half a mile away, accessible only by a rough logging road. He'd converted his cabin's basement into a makeshift medical facility. The journals described his attempts to treat injuries on a physiology he didn't understand, fractures that didn't align with any skeletal structure in medical textbooks, tissue that responded unpredictably to human medications, a respiratory system that seemed to process oxygen but required different partial pressures than human lungs. April 3rd, 1997. He's conscious more often now. We've established basic communication through drawings. He understands that I'm trying to help. I think he knows I've hidden him, chosen not to report the crash. His eyes, large, dark, impossibly expressive, show something I can only interpret as gratitude mixed with profound sadness. He drew a symbol today, repeated it several times. Later, pointing to himself, he traced it again. I think it's his name or designation. I'm calling him Kai. The photographs began in April 1997. Michael had documented everything with the methodical precision of someone who understood he was recording something historically unprecedented. The images showed a being approximately 5.5 feet tall, slender build, with elongated limbs and a cranial structure that was larger in proportion to body size than human anatomy. The skin appeared pale gray-blue, smooth-textured. The hands showed 4 digits, including an opposable thumb. But what struck me most was the expression captured in later photographs. A face that was profoundly non-human, yet somehow conveyed emotion I could read. Pain, confusion, slowly growing trust. Michael's medical background proved essential. He documented vital signs, though he had to develop entirely new baseline parameters. Normal human body temperature meant nothing for Kai's physiology. Blood pressure readings were incomprehensible. Respiratory rate varied with activity in ways that didn't match human patterns. May 12, 1997. Major breakthrough in communication. Kai has been drawing increasingly complex diagrams. Today I recognized mathematical notation. Not our symbols, but the concepts are universal. He's trying to explain what happened to the craft. From what I can understand, there was a catastrophic failure in something that resembles a navigation or propulsion system. He wasn't supposed to be here. This was an accident, and he's stranded. The journals revealed Michael's methodical approach to an impossible situation. He couldn't report Kai without triggering military or government intervention. He couldn't seek outside medical expertise without exposing Kai's existence. He was completely alone in providing care for an injured being whose very existence contradicted every assumption about humanity's place in the universe. He quit his medical practice in June 1997, citing family health issues requiring extended care. He sold his Portland home and moved permanently to the cabin. The journals detailed the logistics, modifying the basement for long-term habitation, installing better climate control, acquiring medical equipment through carefully dispersed purchases that wouldn't raise flags. August 8, 1997. Kai's physical injuries are healing, though more slowly than I'd hoped. But I'm beginning to understand the psychological dimension of his situation. He's profoundly isolated, not just from his own kind, but trapped in an environment that must seem alien and possibly hostile. I play music sometimes, classical mostly. He seems to find it soothing. Today he touched my hand. Just a brief contact, but the gesture felt deliberate. Communication beyond necessity. Perhaps the beginning of actual connection. The financial records I found in the storage unit showed how Michael managed the next 22 years. He'd inherited money from his parents, invested wisely, and lived simply. His entire life became dedicated to maintaining Kai's safety and well-being while hoping for, what? Rescue? Return? December 1997, 6 months now. Kai has learned to understand spoken English, though he can't produce the sounds. His vocal anatomy is completely different. We communicate through writing, drawing, and an evolving system of gestures. Today he drew something that made my breath catch. A star map. He pointed to one star, then to himself. Then he drew what I think is a trajectory, ending at Earth. And then he drew multiple paths leading away from Earth, possible routes home. But he tapped each one and shook his head. No way to signal. No way to navigate. No way to leave. I found technical drawings tucked into the journals. Kai's attempts to explain his technology. Michael's careful transcription of concepts he only partially understood. Propulsion systems that seemed to involve quantum field manipulation. Navigation using principles that didn't match any human physics I recognized. Energy systems that appeared to operate on scales Michael described as impossibly efficient. The tragedy embedded in these early entries was profound. A physician who'd abandoned his entire professional life, and a being who'd lost everything, home, purpose, any hope of return, existing together in isolation, bound by circumstance, and growing mutual dependence. The journals from 1998 through 2003 documented the evolution of isolation into something more complex. Routine, companionship, and the careful architecture of a hidden life. Michael developed protocols for everything. Monthly supply runs to different stores across 3 counties, rotating his purchasing patterns to avoid suspicion. Medical equipment acquired through online auctions and estate sales. A satellite internet connection installed under a shell company name. every detail calculated to maintain invisibility. But between the logistical entries, a different narrative emerged. The gradual development of genuine relationship between two beings who had nothing in common except enforced proximity and mutual dependence. March 1998. Kai has been observing how I cook. Today he indicated he wanted to try preparing food himself. I showed him the basics of using the stove, how to handle kitchen implements designed for human hands. He's remarkably dexterous despite the different finger configuration. He made something I can only describe as experimental. Vegetables arranged in patterns that seemed more mathematical than culinary. It wasn't exactly edible by my standards, but his expression when he presented it showed such clear pride that I ate every bite. The photographs from this period showed the cabin's transformation. The basement had evolved from makeshift medical facility to living space, books on shelves, a workspace with drawing materials, even what appeared to be artwork on the walls. Kai's drawings, Michael noted, combined precise technical illustration with something more abstract, possibly aesthetic expression. July 1999. 2 years now. I've been teaching Kai to read English. His comprehension is remarkable. Yesterday I found him reading Gray's Anatomy, completely absorbed in the illustrations of human skeletal structure. He pointed to diagrams of the human hand, then to his own hand, then drew comparative skeletal structures, showing the profound differences in bone arrangement and joint articulation. He's studying us the way I've been studying him, trying to understand the biological reality of an alien species. But isolation carried costs. Michael's journals revealed increasing loneliness, the psychological weight of maintaining absolute secrecy. He had no friends, no social connections, no one he could confide in. Every interaction with the outside world required careful performance, maintaining the fiction of the solitary hermit caring for an invalid relative who was never seen. December 2000. Holiday season always difficult. I see families in town, hear conversations about Christmas gatherings. Kai noticed my mood. He created something, I don't know what else to call it, a kind of geometric sculpture using wire and glass pieces. When light passes through it, it creates patterns that seem to shift and flow. He presented it to me with what I've learned to recognize as his expression of gift-giving. I cried, first time in years, not from sadness but from the realization that this being, stranded millions of miles from home, was trying to comfort me. The technical collaboration intensified during these years. Kai attempted to explain concepts from his understanding of physics, mathematics, biology. Michael transcribed everything, even when comprehension remained partial. I found notebooks filled with equations, diagrams of devices, attempts to bridge two completely different technological frameworks. One entry from 2002 detailed a significant breakthrough. Kai has been trying to explain how their navigation systems work. It's based on something he calls, my translation, quantum topology of spacetime. Not faster than light travel in the science fiction sense, but something about manipulating the geometric structure of space itself. He says it requires precise calibration to destination coordinates and real-time updating from network systems. The crash happened because his craft lost connection to that network, like a boat losing GPS and radar simultaneously in the middle of an ocean. He drifted into Earth's gravity well before emergency systems could compensate. But with understanding came harder questions. If Kai's people had network systems spanning interstellar distances, why hadn't they searched for him? Why no rescue mission? April 2003. Had the difficult conversation today. Asked Kai directly, aren't his people looking for him? His response translated through our communication system. They believe him dead. The crash was catastrophic enough that any monitoring systems would have registered total loss. And their protocols apparently don't include extended search and rescue for single craft accidents in unmonitored space. The mathematics of searching random planetary systems is prohibitive. They mourned him and moved on. He's been dead to them for 6 years. The emotional impact of this revelation echoed through subsequent entries. Kai fell into something Michael described as profound depression, days of minimal communication, withdrawal from their established routines, what appeared to be grief finally finding full expression. June 2003. Kai has begun to engage again. But something has changed. He's accepted that rescue isn't coming, that this is his permanent reality. Yesterday he did something unprecedented. He asked me, through drawings and gestures, to teach him more about Earth, about human culture, about how to exist in this world he never intended to inhabit. It's heartbreaking and hopeful simultaneously. He's choosing to live rather than merely survive. The subsequent years showed that evolution. Kai learned to cook human food, developed preferences for certain music. Apparently Mozart resonated with him in ways other composers didn't. Began reading voraciously, science texts, history, even fiction. The photographs from this period showed a being adapting to permanent exile, finding small pleasures in an alien environment. Michael documented every stage with the precision of an anthropologist studying a unique culture, except the culture was one individual learning to exist between worlds, neither fully belonging to his origin nor fully capable of integrating into human society. December 2005. 8 years. Sometimes I forget how extraordinary this is. We have dinner together, we debate ideas, we share comfortable silence. Kai has become the closest friend I've ever had, and yet I'm always aware that I've kept him prisoner as surely as I've protected him. The cabin is sanctuary and cage simultaneously. He's safe here. He's also profoundly, irreversibly alone among billions of his captor's species. The weight of that paradox, protector and jailer, friend and isolator, permeated every entry that followed. The tone of Michael's journals shifted dramatically in 2009. After 12 years of isolation, of resignation to permanent separation from Kai's people, something changed. March 2009. Kai has been increasingly agitated for the past 3 weeks. He keeps drawing the same symbol, something that looks like a stylized wave or pulse. Yesterday he grabbed my arm with unusual intensity and pointed to the sky, traced the symbol again, then drew what I now recognize as a calendar marking approximately 6 months from now. I think he's trying to tell me something is coming. The entries over the following months documented Kai's growing certainty and Michael's mixture of hope and dread. If Kai's people were returning, it meant potential rescue for Kai and potential exposure of everything Michael had done to hide him. July 2009. Kai has constructed something in the basement. He's been working with materials I didn't know he'd collected, small electronic components, wire, pieces of metal. It looks like a combination of sculpture and technology. He indicates it's a receiver of some kind. He's listening for something, or waiting for a signal. I found photographs of the device in the storage unit. It looked organic somehow despite being made of clearly technological components. Circuits arranged in patterns that seemed more biological than engineered. Crystals positioned at specific geometric points. The whole assembly creating something that defied easy categorization. August 15, 2009. 3:47 a.m. Kai woke me. The device is active, producing a low-frequency hum I can feel in my bones. He's more animated than I've ever seen him, drawing frantically, trying to explain. From what I can understand, his people conduct periodic surveys of systems where they've had incidents or anomalies, every 25 of their years, which equals approximately 12 Earth years. The crash happened in 1997. They're coming back to investigate the area, scanning for any residual technology or signals. It's not a rescue mission. They still believe he's dead. But if he can generate the right signal, if he can reach them, the next weeks of entries showed Michael grappling with impossible choices. If Kai signaled his people, what would happen? Would they simply retrieve him and leave? Would they investigate how he'd survived? Who had helped him? Would Michael become a security risk requiring elimination? Or worse, a subject for study himself? September 2009. Had the conversation I've been dreading. Asked Kai directly, "What happens to me if you signal them?" His response was brutally honest. He doesn't know. His people have protocols for contamination scenarios, first contact protocols, security measures for protecting their existence. None of those protocols account for a human who's provided shelter for 12 years and knows detailed information about their technology, biology, culture. I could be seen as valuable intelligence source, or as threat requiring neutralization. But beneath Michael's fear, the journals revealed something more profound. His understanding that keeping Kai meant condemning him to permanent exile, while allowing him to signal meant accepting personal risk for Kai's freedom. September 28, 2009. Made my decision. Told Kai to prepare his signal. Whatever consequences follow, I can't be the reason he stays trapped here. He looked at me for a long time after I said this, that profound, unreadable expression I've come to know so well. Then he did something he's never done before. He placed both his hands on either side of my face, gentle pressure, holding my gaze. I don't know what the gesture means in his culture, but it felt like acknowledgement, like gratitude, like goodbye. October 2009's entries became increasingly technical. Kai refined his device, explained to Michael what would happen. The survey ship would pass through the outer solar system, conducting passive scans for technology signatures and anomalies. Kai's device would produce a specific pattern, a distress beacon identifying him by designation and indicating conscious transmission. October 12, 2009. Kai activated the signal tonight. It's broadcasting continuously now, a pulse I can't hear but can feel, like pressure changes, like the air itself vibrating. He says the survey ship should detect it within 72 hours if they're in range. Then we wait to see if they respond. He's calm. I'm terrified. Not of what might happen to me, but of losing him. 12 years of companionship, of shared existence about to end. I'm happy for him. I'm devastated for myself. The waiting period lasted 6 days. Michael's entries from that week were sparse. Emotional restraint breaking down into raw acknowledgement of attachment and impending loss. Then, October 18, 2009. They're here. Not landing. Kai says they won't risk surface contact. But there's a ship in high orbit. He detected it through his device. They've acknowledged his signal and are requesting verification protocols. He's transmitting identity confirmation now. It's real. They're coming for him. The photographs from the following week showed preparations. Kai gathering the few possessions he'd accumulated, drawings, a few books Michael had given him, the geometric light sculpture he'd made years earlier, Michael packing medical records, documentation he'd kept of Kai's biology and care. October 24, 2009. Kai explained the retrieval protocol. They'll send a smaller craft to a remote location. He'll be extracted. I asked if I could come with him to the pickup site. He said yes, but warned me there's significant risk. If his people decide I'm a security threat, I won't be coming home. I told him I'm coming anyway. Some goodbyes require presence. The final entry before the retrieval was dated October 25, 2009. Tomorrow before dawn. Kai and I will drive to the designated coordinates, a clearing 30 miles from the cabin in National Forest. I'm bringing this journal. If something happens to me, if I don't return, at least there will be a record. 12 years of hiding, of friendship, of two impossible lives intersecting. Whatever happens tomorrow, I don't regret any of it. The journal entries resumed on November 3, 2009, 9 days after the planned retrieval. Michael's handwriting was shakier, less controlled than in previous entries. I'm back at the cabin, alive, free, but nothing about what happened makes sense, and I'm only beginning to understand the implications of what I've become part of. The account of the retrieval itself was fragmentary, as if Michael struggled to process what he'd witnessed. We arrived at the coordinates at 4:17 a.m. The clearing was remote. No trails, no roads except the logging track we'd followed. Kai had his device now modified into something he described as a locator beacon. The ship arrived at 4:52 a.m. No sound, no visible propulsion. It simply appeared, hovering 30 feet above the clearing. I expected something massive, imposing. Instead, it was small, perhaps the size of a delivery van, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A section opened, and I saw figures inside. 3 of them, like Kai, but wearing what appeared to be environmental suits. Kai approached. I stayed back as he'd instructed, but then something unexpected happened. One of the figures emerged from the craft and approached me directly. Kai had moved between us, clearly agitated, communicating through gestures and sounds I couldn't interpret. A negotiation. About me. The next several pages detailed an encounter that defied Michael's ability to fully process. The beings examined him, not physically but through scanning technology he couldn't see but could feel, like pressure against his skin, warmth in his bones. They communicated with Kai, a rapid exchange that Michael couldn't follow. The being studying me, I'll call her the commander, though I have no idea of actual rank or role, seemed to make a decision. She approached to within 3 feet. Her eyes, large, dark, impossibly deep, fixed on mine. And then I heard something, not sound, something inside my head. Not words, but concepts, meanings conveyed directly into my consciousness. You protected him. Why? I answered aloud, knowing somehow she would understand. Because it was right. Because he needed help. Understanding. You carry knowledge of us. This creates complexity. I know. Kai explained the risk. Then she conveyed something I'm still trying to fully comprehend. A choice. They could take my memories, remove all knowledge of Kai of the past 12 years, leave me believing I'd lived a different life during that time. Clean extraction, no security risk, no burden of knowing, or I could keep my memories but accept their terms. Absolute silence, continued isolation, and participation in something she described as ongoing observation. They would leave monitoring technology, they would return periodically, and I would become what she called a liaison point, a single human aware of their existence, capable of providing information about human development and potentially facilitating future contact if circumstances changed. Michael chose to remember. The journals revealed his reasoning. Erasing 12 years of companionship with Kai felt like betrayal, like declaring that those years of shared existence were worthless enough to discard. Whatever burdens came with knowing they were preferable to enforced amnesia. The commander accepted my choice. Then she did something that terrified and fascinated me. She placed a device against my temple. I felt warmth, then a sensation like something very small embedding beneath my skin. Kai later explained it's a monitoring implant, passive technology that lets them track my location and vital signs. Insurance against me becoming a security threat. If I attempt to expose their existence, they'll know immediately. If I try to share technological information, they'll intervene. I'm free, but permanently observed. The goodbye between Michael and Kai took only minutes, but clearly carried 12 years of weight. Kai approached me before boarding. He'd been holding something, the light sculpture he'd made for me years ago. He placed it in my hands, then did that gesture again, hands on either side of my face, holding my gaze. I understood it now. It's how his people say goodbye to those who matter. To family. I told him I'd miss him. He couldn't respond in words, but he touched his hand to his chest, then pointed to me. Universal gesture, heart to heart. Whatever we'd been to each other, doctor and patient, protector and protected, human and alien, we'd become something deeper, friends who'd never speak again. The craft departed at 5:34 a.m. Michael drove back to the cabin alone and spent 3 days in what he described as grief that had been delayed for 12 years. But the isolation didn't end. The journals from late 2009 onward revealed Michael's new reality. November 15, 2009. The monitoring device is active. I can't see it, can't feel it, but I know it's there. And twice now, I've experienced what I can only describe as communication. Not continuous, not conversational, just brief moments of conveyed meaning, usually at night. Status checks. Confirmation that I'm maintaining protocols. Reminders that I'm observed. It's lonelier now than when Kai was here. Then, I had companionship in isolation. Now I have isolation witnessing by beings who care only that I remain silent and compliant. The years 2010 through 2015 documented Michael's struggle to build some kind of normal life while carrying impossible knowledge. He volunteered at a free clinic in Sandy, providing medical care without revealing why he'd abandoned his practice years earlier. He maintained the cabin, though the basement remained exactly as it had been when Kai lived there, a shrine to friendship he couldn't acknowledge. April 2013. 16 years since I found him. I'm 61 now. I've spent more than a quarter of my life bound to a secret that defines everything about how I live. Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choice. If amnesia would have been kinder. But then I remember specific moments. Kai's expression when he first tasted chocolate, the way he'd arrange objects in mathematical patterns while thinking, that gesture of goodbye, and I know I couldn't bear to lose those memories, even if keeping them means carrying this weight forever. The entries became increasingly introspective, philosophical meditation on the nature of contact, secrecy, and the burden of being humanity's unknowing ambassador to a species that wanted no formal relationship. The journals from 2016 onward revealed a fundamental shift in Michael's understanding of his situation. What he'd initially perceived as punishment, the monitoring, the enforced silence, the isolation, gradually revealed itself as something more complex. March 2016. Experienced something different last night. The usual monitoring presence, but then more information, conveyed directly into my consciousness the way the commander had communicated during retrieval. Not commands. Data. They showed me, I don't know how else to describe it, images, concepts, understanding of their broader situation. They're not hiding from humanity out of fear. They're waiting, observing, trying to determine if we're capable of contact that won't be catastrophic. And I'm apparently part of that assessment process. My choices, my behavior, my ability to maintain silence while continuing to live ethically It's all data they're gathering about human capacity for discretion and ethical complexity. The revelation that his isolation served a purpose transformed Michael's perspective. He wasn't just keeping a secret, he was participating in an extended evaluation of human readiness for formal contact. Subsequent entries detailed information shared during these periodic communications. The beings, Kai's people, had protocols developed over what Michael understood as thousands of years of encountering other species. First contact, they'd learned, succeeded or failed based primarily on the contacted species' ability to handle ontological disruption without descending into conflict, exploitation, or collective psychological crisis. July 2016. They've been observing Earth for longer than I initially understood. Not continuously, but periodically. Kai's crash wasn't their first incident here. They've had equipment failures, exploratory missions, survey operations spanning back at least several centuries. Most left no trace. Some left artifacts that became myths or were dismissed as hoaxes. They've been careful, patient, waiting for signs that were ready. The communications included specific examples. Sites around the world where their technology had failed or been abandoned. Events in human history that had been influenced by accidental observations of their craft or technology. A pattern of interaction so subtle and carefully managed that humanity had never achieved consensus about their existence. October 2016. Asked directly during last communication, "Why not just reveal yourselves?" The response was complex, but the core reasoning is this. Premature contact has destroyed civilizations. Not through conquest or invasion, but through psychological, social, and economic disruption. Species that learn they're not alone often experience catastrophic loss of meaning, purpose, cultural cohesion. It's analogous to cultural contact between human civilizations, but exponentially more disruptive. They've seen it happen. They won't risk causing it again. But the communications also revealed Kai's ongoing role in Michael's monitoring. He hadn't simply returned to his people and moved on. He'd become an advocate for Michael specifically, and for humanity's potential more broadly. December 2016. Learned something that made me cry. Kai has been arguing for my protection, for humanity's potential, in whatever forms or counsels his people have. The monitoring I experience isn't punishment or mere surveillance, it's protection. Kai convinced them that I represent something significant, human capacity for ethical action without expectation of reward, for sacrifice without recognition, for maintaining integrity under prolonged stress. He's using my choices as evidence that humans might be capable of handling contact responsibly. The weight of this knowledge, that his lonely decades of silence carried implications far beyond his individual life, transformed Michael's understanding of his purpose. He began documenting not just his experiences but his reasoning, his ethical framework, his choices under pressure. March 2017. 20 years since I found Kai. I'm 65 now, retired from the clinic, living on savings and trying to understand what my life has meant. I protected one being and in doing so became a test case for my entire species. The responsibility is crushing and humbling simultaneously. They've shown me fragments of their assessment criteria. They look for capacity for long-term thinking, ability to maintain ethical standards without external enforcement, willingness to sacrifice personal benefit for collective good, capability to handle disturbing truths without psychological break. Essentially, they're testing whether we can be trusted with knowledge that would change everything. But the communications also revealed something darker, divisions among Kai's people about whether humanity would ever be ready for contact. Some argued for permanent observation without engagement. Others advocated for limited contact through carefully selected individuals. A few suggested abandonment, removing all monitoring, and letting humanity develop in complete isolation. September 2017. The debate about humanity's future is apparently intense among them. Kai is part of a faction that believes in our potential, that argues for patience and eventual careful contact. But he's opposed by those who see our violence, our environmental destruction, our inability to cooperate at global scales, and conclude we're too dangerous or too immature for contact. My life, specifically how I've handled these 20 years, is evidence in that debate. If I break silence, if I exploit knowledge for personal gain, if I deteriorate psychologically under the weight of secrecy, it supports those who doubt our readiness. If I maintain integrity, continue living ethically, handle the burden with grace, it supports Kai's position. The pressure of this realization permeated the subsequent entries. Michael wasn't just keeping a secret. He was performing a test he hadn't consented to, with stakes encompassing humanity's entire future relationship with non-human intelligence. December 2017. Sometimes I resent this. I didn't ask to be humanity's representative. I didn't consent to being a data point in an alien civilization's decision-making process. I just helped someone who was injured. But then I remember, Kai didn't ask to crash here. He didn't ask to spend 12 years isolated from everything he knew. We're both trapped by circumstances neither of us chose, trying to make ethical choices within impossible constraints. The journals from 2018, the final year before Michael stopped making payments on the storage unit, showed a man coming to terms with his role and its implications. The discovery of Michael Garrett's journals created immediate complications in my investigation. This wasn't just historical documentation. If the accounts were accurate, this was evidence of ongoing extraterrestrial surveillance of Earth, with potential implications for national security, scientific understanding, and human civilization's broader trajectory. My professional obligation was clear: notify appropriate authorities, turn over the materials, step away. But reading Michael's careful reasoning about why he'd maintained silence for 22 years, I understood that institutional involvement might be exactly what Kai's people were monitoring for, a test of whether humans who encountered this knowledge would respond with discretion or exploitation. I spent 3 weeks analyzing the materials without contacting anyone, trying to verify authenticity while wrestling with the ethical implications of what verification might mean. The biological samples in the storage unit were my first focus: hair-like filaments, tissue preserved in specialized medium, what appeared to be blood samples. I sent microscopic samples to 3 different laboratories under false pretenses, claiming they were from an unknown animal species I'd found, requesting basic genetic analysis. All 3 labs returned results that made no sense: DNA-like structure but non-terrestrial nucleotide composition, cellular organization unlike any known biological taxonomy. Recommend verification that samples haven't been contaminated with synthetic material. The samples were genuine organic material from a non-terrestrial organism, which meant either Michael's account was accurate, or someone had created incredibly sophisticated biological forgeries and hidden them in a storage unit for 22 years waiting for discovery. I contacted Dr. Robert Chen, the physicist I'd worked with on previous projects, and showed him some of Kai's technical drawings from the journals. His analysis was unnerving. "Sarah, these diagrams describe physics that's theoretically possible but far beyond our current engineering capability. Whoever drew these understood quantum field dynamics in ways that align with cutting-edge theoretical work being done right now. Either your source had access to highly classified research from 2018, or they understood principles we're only beginning to grasp. The mathematics is consistent, the concepts are coherent, but the applications described wouldn't be possible with current technology." On day 24 of my investigation, I experienced something that transformed analysis into immediate personal concern. I was working late in my apartment reviewing photographs of the device Kai had built to signal his people when I felt pressure. Not physical pressure, but a sensation I can only describe as presence. Awareness that I was being observed, that attention was focused on me from somewhere I couldn't identify. Then, clearly and unmistakably, I experienced what Michael had described. Information conveyed directly into consciousness without sound or language. You have found Michael's record. Understanding. You face choice. I nearly dropped the photograph I was holding. Who? What? The presence conveyed patient waiting, allowing me to process and respond. "Kai," I said aloud, feeling ridiculous, but having no other framework for this experience. "Correct. Michael designated you Discovery Finder through storage arrangement intentional. He knew health failing. Wanted record preserved, but protected. Michael, he wanted me specifically to find this? No. He wanted someone with your professional characteristics, verification capability, ethical consideration, understanding of documentation significance. You are appropriate choice." Over the next hour, though time felt distorted, uncertain, I experienced communication that defied every assumption about reality I'd built my career on. Kai explained Michael's final years, his declining health, his decision to stop maintaining the storage unit knowing it would eventually be auctioned. Michael had chosen to release the truth through deliberate neglect, rather than active disclosure, letting discovery happen organically rather than forcing revelation. You must decide. Preserve Michael's framework or expose without protection. What framework? Document without attributing. Preserve truth while protecting those who created it. Michael chose anonymity for reason. His choice should be honored. The communication ended as abruptly as it began, leaving me shaking and fundamentally altered. I'd been contacted, directly, by a non-human intelligence that was apparently monitoring my investigation with the same careful attention it had given Michael's choices for 22 years. I called Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the historian I'd consulted on previous projects, and arranged a meeting. I didn't tell her why over the phone, just asked if she could clear a day to review materials I'd found. She arrived at my apartment the following morning, and I spent 6 hours walking her through everything: the auction, the journals, the biological samples, the technical drawings, and, hesitantly, my experience of contact. Patricia listened with the careful attention of someone trained to evaluate historical claims critically. When I finished, she sat in silence for several minutes. "Sarah, if this is authentic, and the evidence you've shown me suggests it might be, you're in possession of perhaps the most significant documentation in human history, and you're also potentially under observation by an intelligence that's been evaluating humanity for centuries. What you do next won't just affect your life or your career. It could influence whether our entire species is considered ready for formal contact." "That's insane," I said. "I'm just a photograph authenticator. I shouldn't be making decisions with those kinds of stakes. Neither should Michael Garrett. But circumstances chose him anyway. Now they've chosen you." We spent 3 days developing a framework. Patricia's expertise in classified historical materials proved essential. We created a documentation plan that would preserve Michael's testimony, make it accessible to serious researchers, but avoid sensational disclosure that might trigger exactly the kind of chaos Kai's people were watching for. "The key question," Patricia said, "is whether revealing this will help humanity develop toward readiness for contact, or whether it will trigger exactly the kind of destructive response that justifies continued isolation." Michael chose patient silence. "Maybe we need to choose patient revelation, truth preserved but released slowly, carefully, with protection for all involved." That night, I experienced contact again. Briefer this time, but clear, understanding your choice. Difficulty. Michael struggled similarly. Know this: truth preserved with ethical framework demonstrates capacity we seek. Decision respected either path. The framework Patricia and I developed required careful balance. Preserve Michael's testimony while protecting his anonymity. Document Kai's existence while avoiding sensational claims that would invite exploitation. And create an archive accessible to serious researchers but shielded from those who would weaponize or commercialize the information. We decided on a multi-layered approach. The journals, photographs, and biological samples would be donated to a secure university archive with restricted access protocols. Researchers would need to demonstrate legitimate academic purpose and agree to confidentiality terms. The materials would be cataloged under Michael's name, but with notations indicating his request for privacy and the sensitive nature of the contents. Simultaneously, I would write a careful account, this account, that documented what I'd found without providing specific locations, full names, or details that could lead to identification of Michael's property or surviving family members who might exist somewhere unaware of his extraordinary life. The decision felt incomplete, insufficient, but it honored the framework Michael had maintained. Truth preserved but protected. Knowledge available but not forced on those unprepared to handle it responsibly. 3 weeks after Patricia and I finalized our plan, I received a package. No return address, no postmark. Simply appeared in my apartment building's lobby with my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize but somehow knew was significant. Inside, a small device, similar to the one Kai had built to signal his people but simpler, clearly designed for human use. And a note, handwritten in English but with occasional letter formations that looked slightly wrong, slightly foreign. "Dr. Chen, Michael told me about human tradition of written thank you. Inadequate for depth of gratitude but using available framework. He believed truth should survive him. He trusted that discovery would find appropriate guardian. You have honored his choice and understood complexity of knowledge you carry. Device included is communication tool. Limited function. If you face decision requiring guidance, if situation develops requiring our awareness, if you simply need confirmation you understood correctly, activate by touching 3 points simultaneously. We will respond when able. Not immediate, not always, but eventually. Michael called me friend. closest human word for relationship we developed. He protected me when he could have profited from exposing me. He maintained silence when pressure to speak must have been immense. He showed me that individual humans, at least, are capable of ethical choice under impossible circumstances. Your choices now show similar capacity, demonstrates what Michael believed, that you are not collectively ready, but individually. Many of you show qualities that suggest eventual readiness is possible. We are patient. We have time. We will continue observing, continue waiting, continue gathering evidence, and we will remember Michael who showed us what your species might become. Kai. I sat with the device for an hour, turning it over in my hands, feeling its weight both literal and metaphorical. I was now formally connected to an intelligence that had been observing Earth for centuries, that had protocols and debates and decisions to make about humanity's future. And I'd been given a voice in that process. Small, limited, but real. Patricia helped me understand the implications. You've become what Michael was, a liaison point, a single human maintaining contact with non-human intelligence, providing data about our capacity for discretion, ethics, and mature handling of disturbing truths. It's a role with no job description, no training, and stakes you can barely comprehend. I never wanted this, I said. Neither did Michael. But here we are. I activated the device once 2 months after receiving it, not because I needed guidance, but because I wanted confirmation that the contact was real, that I hadn't constructed an elaborate psychological framework to deal with disturbing materials. The response came 6 hours later. That familiar presence, that sense of being heard by something fundamentally other. Confirmation. Contact real. Your documentation framework appropriate. Michael's legacy preserved respectfully. Gratitude. I asked one question. Will you ever make formal contact? Or will humanity remain in this state of partial awareness indefinitely? Answer depends on continued observation, on choices made by individuals like Michael, like you, on development of collective capacity to handle disruption without catastrophe. We do not know timeline. We remain patient. What if we're never ready? Then we continue as now. Occasional accidental contact. Individual relationships like Michael and Kai. Truth preserved in margins. Waiting for readiness that may or may not arrive. Not punishment. Simply recognition of reality. The communication ended with what felt like an addendum, more personal than the previous exchanges. Michael asked, before death, that we find way to tell you. He did not regret choices. 22 years of isolation, painful but meaningful. Friendship with Kai defined his life in ways he valued more than recognition or normal life. He hoped you would understand. Some secrets are sacred not because they're dangerous, but because truth carries responsibilities that must be honored. I've carried that message for the past 8 months. I've established the archive Patricia and I designed. I've written this account, carefully balanced between disclosure and protection. And I've accepted the role I never sought. Guardian of knowledge that might shape humanity's future. Keeper of one man's testimony about 22 years of friendship across species boundaries. The monitoring device Kai described. The implant Michael received. I don't know if I have one. I've felt no sensation of installation, experienced no medical procedures, but I'm aware that I'm likely observed, that my choices matter in ways beyond my individual life, that I've become part of an extended evaluation I neither designed nor control. It's isolating. It's profound. It's exactly what Michael experienced. And reading his journals, I understand now why he chose documentation over disclosure. Why he preserved truth while maintaining silence. Some knowledge demands protection not because it's false, but because it's true. And truth released carelessly can destroy as surely as truth suppressed completely. Michael Garrett died on January 17, 2019, in a hospice facility in Bend, Oregon. The obituary was brief. Retired physician, no surviving family. Memorial donation suggested to the Oregon Wilderness Coalition. 3 people attended his service. The hospice chaplain, a nurse who'd cared for him during his final weeks, and me. I'd learned of his death through the cessation of storage unit payments, through the paper trail that led from auction to archive, to the realization that the man who'd documented everything had chosen to fade into anonymity, even in death. He'd arranged his final affairs to leave minimal trace, maximum privacy, and no claims on anyone's attention. The nurse told me he'd been lucid until the final days, that he'd spent his last weeks reading and seemed at peace. He talked about a friend sometimes, she said. Someone he'd known years ago. He'd smile when he mentioned this friend. like remembering something precious. I asked once if we should try to contact this person, let them know about his condition. He said his friend already knew that they'd said their goodbyes long ago. I didn't explain that the friend was likely monitoring Michael's vital signs through technology embedded beneath his skin, that Kai had probably known the moment Michael's heart stopped beating, that somewhere beyond Earth a being who'd spent 12 years hiding in a basement was experiencing grief for a human who'd sacrificed a normal life for his safety. The archive I established opened 6 months after Michael's death. The University of Oregon Special Collections accepted the donation with appropriate gravity, though I'm certain they don't fully comprehend what they're preserving. The finding aid describes the collection as personal papers and research materials of Dr. Michael Garrett, including technical documentation and journals relating to claimed extraterrestrial contact, 1997-2018. Claimed. That single word does so much work. Acknowledging the content while maintaining institutional skepticism, preserving the materials without validating their implications. 3 researchers have accessed the collection so far. 2 were ufologists looking for evidence to support existing beliefs. Disappointed to find Michael's careful documentation offered no simple proof, no dramatic revelations, just the complex testimony of one man's extended ethical struggle. The 3rd was a medical ethicist researching physician decision-making under extreme circumstances. She spent 2 weeks with the materials and emerged shaken, uncertain whether to believe the literal content, but profoundly moved by Michael's reasoning about responsibility, sacrifice, and moral choice. She contacted me afterward. Dr. Chen, regardless of whether these events happened as described, Michael Garrett's journals represent an extraordinary meditation on ethics under isolation. His framework for handling knowledge he couldn't share, his reasoning about protection versus disclosure, his struggle with loneliness while maintaining integrity, these are relevant to anyone dealing with sensitive information and conflicting obligations. I agreed. Because even if someone dismissed the literal truth of Michael's account, rejected the possibility of Kai's existence, explained away the biological samples, rationalized the technical drawings, the ethical framework remained valid. How do we handle truth that carries dangerous weight? How do we balance individual relationships against collective implications? How do we maintain integrity when circumstances force us into isolation? These questions transcend the specifics of extraterrestrial contact. They apply to anyone who's ever held classified information, protected vulnerable populations, or maintained professional confidentiality under pressure. Michael's testimony speaks to universal human experiences, even as it documents something potentially unprecedented in human history. I've used Kai's communication device 3 times since that first confirmation. Once to report that the archive was established and operating according to Michael's framework. Once to notify them of a researcher who seemed dangerously close to identifying Michael's actual property location. They acknowledged and indicated they'd introduce complications to prevent disclosure. And once, 6 months ago, simply to ask if they were still watching, still evaluating, still patient. The response, always. Michael's example remains significant data point. Your continuation of his framework adds to evidence. Humanity shows individual capacity for ethical complexity. Collective readiness remains uncertain. We continue observing. I asked if they'd ever contacted anyone else, if there were other Michael Garretts scattered across the planet, other humans maintaining individual relationships with beings whose existence remained officially unacknowledged. Yes. Small number. Different circumstances. Same essential framework. Individual contact. Protected anonymity. Ongoing observation. You are not alone in carrying this knowledge, though you may never meet others who carry it. That knowledge helps and doesn't help. I'm part of a dispersed community of witnesses, none of us able to contact each other, all of us maintaining parallel silences, all of us serving as data points in an evaluation we barely understand. The weight of it varies. Some days it's simply background knowledge, like understanding quantum physics exists even though it doesn't affect daily life. Other days it's crushing. The awareness that I know something that could transform human civilization, that I'm choosing to maintain silence about it, that I'm participating in a framework of gradual disclosure whose timeline might extend centuries beyond my lifetime. I think about Michael often, about his choice in that ravine in 1997 to help rather than report, to protect rather than expose, about his 22 years of isolation, of companionship with a being he could never publicly acknowledge, Of watching Kai leave and then living another decade carrying memories he couldn't share. Did he make the right choice? I don't know. The right choice for what outcome? What timeline? What value system? He protected Kai. He preserved evidence for future discovery. He demonstrated that at least one human could maintain ethical standards under extraordinary pressure. But he also lived in profound loneliness, died with minimal human connection, sacrificed normal life for obligations he never asked for. The journals suggest he made peace with those costs, that he valued his friendship with Kai more than recognition, treasured the truth he knew more than the easier life he might have lived in ignorance. I'm trying to find that same peace. Trying to accept that some knowledge carries responsibilities that override personal preference, that truth sometimes demands protection rather than proclamation, that silence can be the most ethical form of testimony. Michael Garrett helped an injured alien hide for 22 years. What followed was classified, not by government agencies but by the very beings he protected, by the framework of patient contact they maintained, by the recognition that humanity might not be collectively ready for truths that individuals could handle with grace. I've inherited that framework now, keeper of Michael's testimony, guardian of evidence that waits for readiness, another data point in an evaluation whose conclusion I'll likely never see. Some secrets aren't kept because they're false. They're kept because they're sacred, and truth released carelessly destroys what patient silence might preserve.